I'm based in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Cambridge. That's kind of, there you go. That's all you need. The speakers are the ones that we're focusing on. So our first one is Saleyha, and just putting that. Oh, just I will hold up signs and I will hear the alarm.
I will sit to the side. Just before we begin, I just want to say there are 2 little clips in the film, and the theme of my work is healthcare and armed conflict. So I just want to give a warning that they could be distressing. There's nothing graphic in terms of medical kind of footage, but the subject matter is distressing. So I just want to warn you on that. So I'm a PhD student in the International Health Systems Group, and my PhD is looking at the impact of attacks against healthcare in armed conflict. And I'm also the convener and founder of the Crash Healthcare and Conflict Research Network. So I'm going to begin with this short clip. Now, let's hope that there's sound. Okay, it just needs the little thing at the.
I went to Palestine, out to Nablus and Ramallah, because I wanted to spend time with medical personnel, be it paramedics or doctors, and find out what it's like being a medical professional in an area that is basically a conflict zone. My first appointment in Ramallah was to meet Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. He's the founder and head of the United Palestinian Medical Relief Committee here in Palestine.
We have 16 mobile clinics functioning all over the country, and plus that, in addition to that, we have at least 1 team inside every city. So we're talking about more than 30 teams functioning at this very moment.
Is this the only way they can receive medical attention?
This is the only way. There is no other way, because the whole country is under curfew.
Can you move?
Now we can, but sometimes they even stop us. And there were occasions when they shot even at our ambulances, but we were very firm and we insisted to continue the work. And during the last month, we were attacked 128 times.
Suddenly, we started to hear gunshots, and it took me a while to realize that actually those gunshots were coming in our direction.
انزل على الارض، انزلوا عمو، وانزل واسبح سباحه على الدراج، انزل. طيب عمو انزلوا هنيك تحت خليكم. ايوه باش ضلك مات.
We've just driven into Nablus. We've come across a tank, and they have signalled for us to stop. It's normal.
Going to move on from that, but that was a young Mustafa Barghouti. So I'm just going to add a little bit here. Last year was the first time I met him since 2002, and I was able to show him that clip, and he said, "Oh, that's when I was young." But I think he's not changed a bit. It was lovely to show him that. So many of you might, some of you might know about my Crash network, and the emblem for that is actually that image, and that image was from that particular day when, for me, it solidified that this is a bad trajectory of travel if we continue with this attacks against healthcare. And just to put it into context, a few years before that, I was a British Army officer serving in the Balkans, and I wore a uniform, I carried a weapon, and I wore the Red Cross emblem. I was not a doctor, I was a medical support officer. But before I went to Bosnia, deployed to Bosnia, I was taught the laws of armed conflict. I was together with the entire battalion put in a hangar a few days before, and we had pre-deployment training, and during that training we were taught the relevant parts of international humanitarian law and human rights law pertaining to us as medical units on the ground. And that led to me having I subsequently was inspired to become a doctor from what I witnessed in Bosnia, but the seed was sown, and I then travelled to Palestine a few years later. And so the shock of seeing it from the vulnerable perspective of a healthcare worker just in your ordinary clothes was quite something. But it sowed a seed, and I wanted to understand the law of armed conflict even further, and international humanitarian law. And I'm enrolled to do a master's in international human rights and humanitarian law, taught by this absolute icon, Professor Francois Hampson, who sadly died a few months ago. I was taught by her in 2012, and the seed was sown even more so on issues of IHL relating to both healthcare workers. My research work for her was on attacks against healthcare workers, but also journalists. And it just feels just so, you know, I regret not being able to have conversations with her at this time about what's going on now, but I wanted to pay tribute. I wanted to just quickly bring you up to date with attacks against healthcare and armed conflict. By 2030, 60% of low middle income countries will be identified as fragile, conflict, violence impacted countries, according to the World Bank. Okay, 15 of the top 25 most vulnerable countries will also be vulnerable to climate, and they will also be FCV. And importantly, attacks against healthcare predominantly occur in FCV countries. According to the WHO surveillance system for attacks, we know that over 6,700 attacks against healthcare have happened globally, over 2,000 deaths, more than 4,200 injuries, over 21 countries between 2017 to 2024. 60%, and this was a study done by the International Rescue Committee, 60% based in North Syria, 60% of civilians who were interviewed were directly impacted during attacks against healthcare, with nearly 50% afraid to access medical care and nearly 60% afraid to live near facilities. I just want to show you a quick map. Those are the countries as per the WHO SSA. That details the number of attacks. Essentially, there are lots. And that just gives you a snapshot that just for Yemen, for example, with all the attacks against healthcare, just under 50% are left to be functioning healthcare facilities compared to what they should have. And in Sudan, just over 50% are fully functioning, the rest are not. So I was asked to write a report by the WHO, and I wrote the first 42 drafts, I would say, not far from here on the west side, during last year's hot summer. And then obviously with events in Gaza, things got a little bit more focus and attention on the report. And then we convened a small lastminute.com meeting with lots of other experts who were brought in. And what it highlighted to me that consensus in this area is lacking. So my PhD is looking at consensus on the challenges and solutions. But within this report, I was able to write and develop the recommendations that essentially I thought it was a bit of a big ask asking me, just a PhD student here, to come up with some recommendations. But I thought, okay, dig deep. What have I learned? What did the giant Francois Hampson teach me? What else have I learned along the way? So I did write the recommendations, and I'm thankful, even though a lot of the other bits in the report got changed by committee, the recommendations stuck. And so I think we can own them as a collective. So I just wanted to say, so what was the main recommendation that I was desperate to make sure happened? Well, I feel passionately, I don't think that everyone needs to go and do a master's in international human rights and humanitarian law if they're a medic or a healthcare worker. But I think that we can make that kind of education accessible to all. And I draw on my experience pre-deployment in the Balkans. It was a few hours pre-deployment. I felt a little bit more acquainted with the laws. They have stuck with me for 20 plus years. I think that we can offer that education to healthcare workers today within medical schools, nursing schools, and other healthcare providers at undergraduate level. I'm still having a little bit of having to push for that, but you know, no one said it wasn't going to be easy anyway. So I think that this is what this recommendation I wrote, and it has stuck and it's made it into the report. I don't think I've got time to show you that, unfortunately, but that was the recommendation in writing, integrate IHL and human rights law into educational curricula. And this is something that needs to be done at national and international levels. And I argue that since that recommendation was written here, wouldn't it be amazing if it could actually become real in Cambridge too? So I am trying. If anyone's got any links to the medical school, then I'll be very grateful to hear from you and we can chat. But that's what I want to offer. In the very last minute, I've got 1 minute, then I'm 1 minute clip. This is what drives me. This is the world that we are living in now. I worked in Syria in 2013 as a medic, and we're living on, obviously this is post 2016, but this is data that's going to be part of my PhD, but I want to give you a snapshot of, unfortunately, where we are right now, what we're living with, and this is what is driving me.
To an Air Force pilot on a bombing mission over Syria. But these coordinates aren't for a military target. They point to this underground hospital. Moments later, the pilot bombs it.
And with that, I will leave you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next panelist is Luma, and I'm letting each person introduce what they want to about themselves, and you. Thank you,
Eolene. So that's a tough act to follow. So I won't be using any slides, so hopefully you can all hear me in the back. My name is Luma Bashmi. I'm a doctoral student at the Department of Psychiatry and Cambridge Public Health at the University of Cambridge. I also co-founded and directed Ila Beirut, which is a non-profit foundation that gave free mental health care to people in need in Lebanon following the Beirut port explosion. So my doctoral research is almost an extraction of that. So I'm very glad to be here with all of you in Cambridge and in Beirut. And let me begin with a brief story that touches on the conference theme, the challenges of accountability, equity, sustainability, and education interventions. In an interview for my research, I spoke with Dr. Joanna, a Jordanian molecular biologist and founder of We Love Reading. So We Love Reading is a grassroots initiative that pairs refugee women with children to read Arabic stories for pleasure in Jordan. We were discussing sustainability in humanitarian interventions, and she raised a very powerful point. Why is sustainability always defined through a Western or global lens? In Islamic traditions, for example, we already have sustainable community-led interventions and practices. We have zakat, Hajj initiatives, and even the collective spirit that happens during Ramadan. These aren't externally donor funded or driven. They happen every year, led by communities, for their own communities, motivated by faith and solidarity. So the question becomes, why not recognize these as legitimate models of sustainability? Why do we default to external metrics instead of building from within our own cultural philosophy and values? So I think you all know the context within which, and many have spoken about it yesterday and today, but I'll just briefly touch on it again. there are over 122 million displaced people in the world. 43 million are refugees, mainly coming from the Middle East and North Africa. So Lebanon and Jordan host some of the largest numbers of refugees in the world per capita. And while research often documents trauma and mental illness among refugees, most of it focuses on pathology, so PTSD, depression, anxiety, and is based on Western diagnostic models. What's largely missing is an evaluation of culturally appropriate mental health and psychosocial support interventions, or MHPSS interventions. And even more rarely do we ask, how do refugees themselves define us individually? What support do they actually want? So my question to you is, why focus on mental health during an education conference? Because it's foundational. Without mental health and well-being, individuals continue to struggle to attain education, get a job, seek safety, or connect with their communities. Mental health isn't secondary to survival, but essential for it. Now, what are MHPSS interventions? There are quite a few of you here who are mental health background or understand the language, but I want to explain it a little bit more. These include any programs or initiatives that are about promoting or supporting mental health. So when we want to support mental health, that might mean traditional counseling or peer support groups, but it can also mean community education. It could be even vocational training that foster connection and meaning. The most effective ones are those that engage different parts of the community and become a daily part of our life, like the Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Children initiative. So this initiative trains women who are refugees in Lebanon to cook on a larger scale, feed children in school during the academic year, and get paid for it. So women become empowered by supporting their families financially, increasing their bonds and networks, and having a sense of agency over their futures, giving their children a chance to go to school instead of work early or get married early. So my doctoral research explores precisely all these questions of cultural concepts of distress and how to co-design interventions successfully using a three-phased mixed methods approach. So the first phase is a systematic review of non-clinical MHPSS interventions for Arabic-speaking refugees in the MENA region. So we assessed 38 eligible interventions only, those were the only ones we found. And we assessed them for feasibility, effectiveness, cultural sensitivity, and implementation capacity. In our second phase, we went to the community and listened to them. So we held 18 focus groups with 100 Palestinian and Syrian refugees, as well as Jordanian nationals in Jordan. All focus groups were split by gender and by nationality. We also held expert interviews in Lebanon and Jordan. We explored how refugees perceive their own needs and mental health, how cultural identity and gender shapes their lived experiences, and how it shapes how they manifest distress and coping. And we also assessed their readiness for a mental health intervention. By the third phase, we're integrating findings from both phase 1 and phase 2 to co-produce and co-design guidelines for culturally grounded, feasible, and scalable interventions that don't just target refugees, but also target the host communities. From the literature, we know that there are rising tensions between Lebanese and Syrian refugees or Jordanians and refugees. And in order for us to make sure that it fits everyone, we have to be inclusive, and inclusion is very important. So the goal isn't just evaluation, but co-production, working with, not on communities. And co-production can become an act of resistance to knowledge extraction. So one core aim is to really challenge the power dynamics of knowledge production that many of you have already mentioned in your talks. Too often we know that humanitarian research extracts knowledge from crisis-affected populations and reproduces Western assumptions. Instead, we're practicing co-production. So we want to see refugees as partners, not subjects. In our focus groups, we use participatory approaches that create spaces for participants to affirm their own knowledge systems, what they already do to support each other, what works, what they value, and then we use that to inform our findings by these local knowledge systems. This isn't just inclusive. It's essential if we want interventions that are culturally relevant, effective, and just. And it also pushes us to reframe what mental health is. It's not about focusing on just the individual concerns, but also focusing on community resilience, identity, and agency. So we then ask, who defines distress? Who decides what healing looks like? And who gets to shape the solution? So let me share with you a few powerful examples of educational interventions that promoted or enhanced mental health from both the literature and the interviews and focus groups we did. The first is Sieverding's Amina community-based project, which focused on delaying early marriage among Syrian refugee girls in Lebanon. Although it didn't significantly impact all outcomes, it was one of the highest rated interventions for feasibility and cultural alignment. So it involved the girls' parents, the schools, peer refugees, as well as community workers to co-design, facilitate, and participate in these interventions. The second, We Love Reading, which I mentioned earlier, actually has reached over 300,000 children through volunteer-led story sessions. But according to the founder, that's not how she measures impact. According to their evaluations have shown an increase in reading habits, enhanced executive functioning, as well as pro-social behavior from the children themselves. We've also seen how parental engagement has also improved at home. The last intervention, United Lebanon Youth Project, offers higher education scholarships to both marginalized refugee youth and locals. They now support over 300 active students and 800 graduates. But it's not just about accessing university. It's also about transforming their futures and also their family trajectories. So similar scholarship interventions from the literature has shown various benefits, including psychosocial and financial, that trickle down to the families themselves. And all these interventions worked not just because they had funding and structure, but because they were peer-led, grounded in cultural context, and emphasized relationships, community, and agency. They were culturally sensitive. They focused on what went beyond language and imagery and chose to organize detailed consultations with cultural representatives to make sure they are relevant throughout the program. Our systematic review found that NHPSS intervention promoted complex thinking, or how we deal with difference and disagreement, relational healing, and a sense of belonging linked with more favorable outcomes. They built trust, safety, networks across refugee and host communities. Also, the measures that we use to assess these interventions actually very much focused on clinical settings. Many had to be modified to match the humanitarian setting and context. And from that, what we take is that these quality assessments also need to be revisited and developed for cultural alignment. So in closing, if we want interventions that are feasible, effective, and sustainable, we really need to ask, what makes an intervention successful and have an impact? It's not just metrics or outcomes defined by external actors, but multiple partners, and most importantly, the communities that we're targeting. So it's all about listening, knowledge sharing, co-production, co-designing, and trusting local systems of care and meaning. We need to rethink how we define success and impact, and who gets to decide. Through culturally grounded, co-designed interventions, we not only support mental health, but also contribute to equity, justice, and inclusive knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Maha, and I'm continuing to let people introduce themselves.
Thank you. My name is Maha Yutak C. There are a lot of Mahas here that I recognize. Yeah. Yeah, I was actually born in Burma, and I do actually work in Burma, still work in Burma. I go back and forth, but not lately, because it's not safe for me. There are several reasons for presenting this topic. First is the internal conflicts in Burma, now called Myanmar, have been going on and off for half a century. And then there was about 10 years of nascent democracy starting around 2011 with a democratic election in 2015. This all collapsed in February 2021 with yet another military coup. And the dominoes that have collapsed since are many, but apparently in the area that I work in at the intersection of education and mental health. I am a clinical psychologist by training, and I also teach at Myanmar Clinical Psychology Consortium, and now I'm going to be teaching at Singapore University of Social Sciences, and also in the region, in ASEAN region as well, with various groups. The second reason is actually the effects of this most recent coup on education and mental health services are different for this new generation of displaced youth. This generation, I'm actually from two generations, a youth from 2 generations ago, but this generation, they have tasted democracy and grew up with internet and can imagine how they want to live. Many of us didn't. And also, of course, there are also the data, the numbers. As of 2025, there are 1.3 million refugees and asylum seekers from Myanmar, plus 3.5 million internally displaced persons. And more recently, there have been like 300,000 migrants, unidentified, because there was especially young people, because there was a force, I'm forgetting the word, but the army was actually trying to get them into the to fight for them, actually. Yeah. So, and also I'm going to be actually talking a little bit about trauma. I just want to inform you. So in the next several minutes, I will go through how those who have powers over education are operating and affecting in the aftermath of the February 2021 coup, and what can we do to address some critical issues, especially in education and mental health, and then 2 samples of our work, and to help think and feel about the information, what is happening and what else can be done. Okay.
Help him
Yeah.
with slides.
It's not. Yeah, please. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So in what is happening since the 2021 coup has been that under the military regime, education is still going on, but it is only in government schools and universities. But many of the teachers have actually, as part of the civil disobedience movement, they have actually left the profession. So we don't know what the quality is these days. And also many of the students themselves, especially university students, they have also left. If they actually continue at the government university, they will be shamed on Facebook. So like, even if they want to, they won't be able to. But strangely, if you were applying for scholarship from Myanmar, the scholarship providers, like for example, Chevening, Fulbright, if Fulbright still does, is they are going to be taking the transcript from the military government university. Yeah. And in exile, the National University National Unity Government, the government in exile, they have their own platform. It's called Spring University. And that platform has not, has provided actually largely free, but we don't know what the quality control is. And they have their coursework, the curriculum is very disparate. You don't really know. And that is one of the reasons. Also, if you apply to another university to continue with your education, they're not going to be taking your transcript. Because, for example, you may be learning to crochet while actually, fixing a car. Those are the kind of courses, so it doesn't make sense. And for free market economy, that means that there are actually a lot of primarily in NGOs. Free market, in the private, they are private schools, but of course only if you can afford it. And NGOs actually provide courses, but they are usually short courses. Short courses meaning like from 1 day, so. Yeah. So this is actually the model that we've been using to actually provide, something that is, this is actually the model that most of the time, we actually see this in like medical training, healthcare training, that you actually have to, so it is about, not just about self-development, but it's also about professional and vocational aspect in there also, because we want people to actually use what they learn. So what's happening in Myanmar is actually usually, there are a lot of people who want to be choreographers, directors, but they're no dancers. So it is actually quite difficult. So we want to make sure that our program is producing workers, doers, not just trainers. And one of the ways that we know that this can happen because we have done it. And Myanmar Clinical Psychology Consortium, MCPC, that I founded, we did it with 0 grants, $0. It is all by actually volunteer work. And I was very inspired by Marissa's talk also, that a lot of volunteers work, but with a lot of kindness from people. So there are a lot of people, a lot of professionals who can actually spare some time. So the way I work is like, hey, if you're coming to Myanmar, do you want to do your vacation plus, something useful, you can teach a course, but not everybody can do that, only qualified people, because I made a mistake. It was like a lesson learned. I actually did an open call and I got all kinds of actually messages, including, including when I did not take them, said like other them, etc. So I don't do that. I will actually take through personal connections. And one of the things that actually the project that we're doing is actually trauma recovery counseling. And in that counseling, we use I think some of you will know Judith Herman, like a feminist, psychiatrist. And this is actually not a technique, but a framework that we use. So when we actually provide the counseling, we notice that a lot of our counselors, a lot of our clients actually can relate very well, because it is about relationships usually. But in Myanmar, people usually think that, Burmese people, they don't do counseling, they don't do psychotherapy, but psychotherapy is only for crazy people. But that's not the experience. If you're able to explain what counseling is, like usually I would start, we all have families, we'll say, how's your relationship with your mother? Things come up, So this is actually about counseling, how counseling works, And another project that we're doing is actually we're providing trauma care education for teachers. So we actually work with teachers, but the teachers usually want actually just like strategy, just give us 1, 2, 3, 4. What can we use? But we also work with them to make sure that, but do you know like what's happening to students, like someone who's like fighting, all the time, someone who's like just in the corner, you know. So we actually educate them that, you know, in little boys, depression may come out as actually aggressive behavior. So yeah, so this, yeah. So I will just actually wrap it up with, you know, maybe we can discuss later, you know, how to move forward and hopefully, you know, get some input on like for restarting MCPC program August. Thank you.
And now we have Joanna. No, is that, yeah, I'm so sorry, Annalan. I apologize. No, that was me, I apologize. Because I was thinking of you and looking at Joanna. That's what happened, sorry about that. So,
Can you guys hear me at the back? Okay. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And it's amazing talks today that's really opened my eyes. Now, just as a disclaimer, I'm not actually a Formula One fan. In fact, I've never watched a Formula One race in my life. But whenever I see this, I always think of the exceptional teamwork that goes on in you know, the maintenance of these cars in such a short period of time under such time pressure. And despite everyone's focusing on one small area, everyone's role is crucial for the functioning of the whole system. And I guess that's how I kind of see partnership working, is that everyone has a clear role and everyone trusts that others are doing their part to make sure a system is working to the best of its ability. So what I'm going to talk today is about a kind of reciprocal learning that I've had through partnership model, with a spotlight on Myanmar. And I should say that I've got a few different hats, and one of them is a Global Health Fellow with Cambridge Global Health Partnerships.
just going to share. With you.
Oh yeah, sure. No worries. That's okay. Thank you very much. Let's see. Let's try that. Oh, there we go. Cool. So I'm going to start by talking about Cambridge Global Health Partnerships. So the title didn't fit in the box there, so I've had to use the acronym. My experience with the Global Health Fellowship, or about the Global Health Fellowship, sorry, the situation in Myanmar that Maha has already alluded to, and then my experience of working with our Myanmar partners. Now, for the sake of security, I'm afraid I'm going to have to be a bit vague. So I can't say who we worked with, and I can't give too much detail about the level of the activities, but the learning is very clear. So Cambridge Global Health Partnerships works on a model of working with partners in countries to develop systems that work effectively. And it uses the values of safe, effective, and ethical processes. And it is based on the Global Health Partnerships principles of practice, or principles of partnership, which the organisation used to be called FET, you might know by then. And they've got 10 clear principles that should be followed, and one of them is about reciprocal learning. And through doing the Global Health Fellowship, I thought that this was a great opportunity to get hands-on experience of improving health systems, of health system strengthening using these principles, and to help me become an innovative public health leader. And this is a picture of all the Global Health Fellows from today. And the Global Health Fellowship is effectively an opportunity to provide protected time for senior health professionals to learn more about global health and to champion the principles of it. And for me, I was introduced to the partnership with Myanmar. Now, Myanmar is a country in Southeast Asia. It has about 55 million people. And as Maha alluded to, there's there was a democratically elected government, but on the 1st of February 2021, that government was overthrown by a military regime. And during that regime, violence against civilians escalated through killings, arrests, torture. And although we can memorize the figures, we can recognize the pictures, I don't think I'd really understand how terrifying the situation is for the people of Myanmar. And I came across this from a doctor in Myanmar, an extract, and I think it captures some of that fear. And the junta, the military regime, didn't just target civilians, they targeted healthcare facilities. That includes the professionals, the buildings, the systems themselves. And there were 411 incidents against healthcare facilities in 2021, with arrests, killings of healthcare professionals. And that pattern repeated year after year. And through these atrocities, people came together through the civil disobedience movement and created systems to help the most vulnerable people that they could. And that includes our Myanmar partners. And in January this year, with Eolene at the back, the director of Cambridge Global Health Partnership, we visited the team that we're working with. And in 3 days, we covered 3 clear topics. One was about programs and funding. The second was about their monitoring and evaluation. And finally, is about quality assurance, the final part that they were trying to develop themselves. And that's luckily where I was able to provide some support from my experience, both a clinician and as a health physician. Now, with these workshops, you normally have pictures of people smiling, enjoying the seminar, but for security reasons, we couldn't have those photos. So I can just have to take my word that they did enjoy the workshop, and it was of some educational value. And unfortunately for you, the only picture we have is me doing a one-man show of Hamlet. So what I'll do is instead, I will focus on, I'll focus on the actual process of developing that quality assurance. So we scanned all the frameworks on international guidance, and we came up with kind of a menu of domains. And working with the organisation's strategy, we identified quality assurance priorities. That included patient satisfaction, staff satisfaction and motivation, and clinical effectiveness. And with each of these, we discussed the issues, we talked about different activities, and we talked about the risk of action and inaction. And there were a large amount of risks, not just directly, but also the wider implications. And what's really important with these 3 quality assurance priorities is that they pretty much turn up at every trust. And actually, through working with our Myanmar partners, I identified some clear learning of my own that I've been able to or will plan to apply in my own public health practice. Firstly is innovation, coming up with ways to access the most vulnerable communities, the vulnerable people, and thinking beyond the current models that we use in the UK or in Western societies. The second is how to integrate care. So it's not all just about being in a hospital, but there are multiple ways that we can access a kind of multidisciplinary approach that means that people can stay in the comfort and security of their own homes. And we always hear about motivation, how healthcare professionals in the UK are, undervalued, how they're overworked. And actually speaking with our Myanmar colleagues, identified ways that we could adopt what they're doing into the UK system. And finally, I personally found working with them inspiring. And in fact, I'm trying to look at ways that I can work with them beyond this Global Health Fellowship, because I do value the work that they're doing. I think it's incredible. So I just want to say thank you to my peers in the Global Health Fellowship, Cambridge Global Health Partnerships, and one of my supervisors, Dr. Sonia Young at the Royal College of General Practitioners. And the same Myanmar doctor came up with this poem, and it really hit home for me, and I wanted to share with all of you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now Joanna. Thank you, Annalan.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I have the slightly dubious honour of being the final panellist of this panel of the day and of the conference. So I'm hoping to keep this quite snappy and hopefully not go over my allotted 10 minutes time. My name is Joanna. I'm the CEO of an education organisation that's called Burma. We work to support access to education for Myanmar youth. So Maha and Annalan have already given the sort of contours of the current crisis. I have a couple of context slides. I won't dwell on these for too long, but really, and this is a map, I'm a geographer, so I love maps. Really, this is just showing the sort of scale and breadth of this crisis that Myanmar is in at the moment. Since the kind of political violence of that moment in February 2021, conflict has spread throughout the country. This map is a really good illustration of that. There are some statistics here. Obviously, that can only take us so far. And as one of our other panelists, I can't see him in the audience, but as he was talking about earlier, obviously there are limits to the data that ACLED can put forward. But you can see really here the scale of the challenge. On top of that, overlaid onto the crisis was a really significant earthquake that happened at the end of March. So all those pre-existing vulnerabilities were made a lot worse by this natural disaster and the limitations on the distribution of aid that the military junta put in place. It's also worth saying that although ceasefires were announced, these were not adhered to on the side of the junta, and actually airstrikes in many of the areas affected by the earthquake happened basically the day after the earthquake struck. So you can kind of get a sense of the scale of violence in Myanmar at this time. What this leads us with, as Maha has outlined, is an enormous amount of displacement. 3.6 million roughly inside of Myanmar, about 1.4 million outside. But this is only a snapshot of people who fall into these sort of international categories of refugee and displacement. And actually there are many, many millions more who have moved into neighbouring countries, into Thailand, India, Bangladesh, who are essentially forced away from their homes to try and find opportunity elsewhere. In this kind of context, as we've heard from other speakers today, education becomes a battleground. My team has pulled together a few different images to really exemplify this. And as Maha was saying, while state education still exists in some spaces, it's either heavily militarized or the curriculum is very constrained. And in fact, for many young people and their parents, they choose not to attend to be a part of that system. So here we have a fortified school. Here we have young primary school students surrounded by soldiers in their classroom, and these are all real photos from the last 4 years. And this final one here shows the destruction of a university in Loikor. I think when you have such effective destruction of an education system, I think we all know that it's going to take many generations to rebuild. And so we have to look for other sorts of solutions to bring higher education access into contexts of this nature. What's not shown in these photos, and I would like to say just for a moment, is that around the country, particularly in these areas controlled by ethnic organisations, there have been many schools and even universities that have been developed over the last 4 years that have aimed to provide education for local population. I know the quality varies. I know that they face many, many significant challenges of accreditation. But I think it's also important to emphasise the sort of active nature of service delivery in these different parts of Myanmar, because these pictures can sometimes give quite a passive view of what is happening. I won't dwell on this slide in the interest of time, but this was produced by a team member and highlights some of these barriers to education, many of which have been discussed over the last 2 days. I would like to say that underpinning all of this is this need for mental health support. I can talk more about that in a moment, but that has been a big request from the students that we support through our programmes, because obviously that impacts on academic attainment and has really significant knock-on effects in young people. So briefly, Prospect Burma, we're a UK charity. We were founded in 1988, which was, again, a time of significant unrest in Myanmar. At that time, university students rose up and protested against the military government. So the charity really has this ethos of wanting to support access to education and trying to focus on supporting those who are most underrepresented, who are marginalised and disadvantaged. Although I would say that the definition of that has obviously expanded hugely since the coup in 2021. We're a very dispersed team. We cannot operate from inside of Myanmar. I have Myanmar colleagues on the borders in Thailand and India. I'm based here in London. But it's really important for us that our Myanmar colleagues are really at the kind of forefront of student support and are providing us as sort of international, the right kind of guidance and input to help us shape the programmes that we deliver. So the programmes are in 2 main areas. We have the higher education support, which is in the form of an in-person scholarship programme, and an online scholarship programme, which I'll talk more about in a moment. But we also do a lot of work in the post-high school, post-secondary space, so supporting pathways into higher education. Because for most young people, many have been out of education now for, or at least since the coup, but for some even before COVID. So we're talking sort of 5 years of being outside of that formal system. So I'll talk a little bit, if I may, about online scholarships. We were the first organisation to set up an online scholarship programme inside of Myanmar. And actually now we are the only provider at the end of US funding for higher education in Myanmar. What we try to do is support subjects that can do 2 things, either enhance service delivery, so particularly in the field of education and in health. We also support future readiness subjects, so subjects that will help young people to kind of build skills that hopefully will come into their own once there's a future transition to a different form of government. We work with a number of different university partners, not Cambridge yet, just saying, but many around the world, North America and Europe and in Asia, to provide access to courses. And that's the really key thing that our students are asking us for, is access to accreditation. I realise I have 2 minutes left. We have a very holistic approach. Mental health provision we're starting to explore. We have a mentorship system in place. That's been a really, really important intervention. And we have a lot of kind of different activities that fall under this programme to help our students kind of navigate this online learning world, which I realise can be very isolating at times. I think this is borne out in the number of applications we're receiving, which has grown 100% year on year since we started. And it's also borne out in the retention rates as well, which are astoundingly at 95% over the 2 years of operation, which is far higher than we had anticipated. Briefly on partners, we have a fantastic network that we are looking to strengthen. And we're bringing new partners on all of the time. And I think this is part of the model that we have. We know that the support for students is right, but we need these university partners to be on this journey with us, understand what the limitations are for students, to provide flexibility and other sorts of support in kind to really strengthen what we do. And I think this is more and more important in this funding environment that we find ourselves in. You know, fundraising is one half of the puzzle, but the other half is trying to introduce cost effectiveness and kind of share the load, essentially. Thank you. So to wrap up, in terms of impact, we've been doing this particular programme for 3 years now. Prospect Burma obviously has been running for 35 years, and with a whole host of data and information on the efficacy of these interventions. I think for online study, one thing that kind of really brought this home to the team and I was seeing the student response after the earthquake, when 77% of our online students basically downed tools and then went to the conflict-affected zones, even behind the conflict lines, to provide support. Many were involved in healthcare and other sorts of activities, fundraising, advocacy, and kind of engineering expertise. So I think that's showing that we're doing something right. And I'm really excited to continue to grow this and to learn as we move forward. So I will stop there. I have many more things to say, but I realise my 10 minutes is up. Thank you so much for your attention.
So thank you all our panelists, and you were in your timekeeping. I'd like to invite you to come to the table if that's okay. And first, a discussion among yourselves, and then we'll open it up to Q&As. Does that sound okay to people? So I'll keep it to, because we have about 30 minutes, because we had an hour and we've been so good with our timekeeping. So well done, us. That I'll keep the discussions among yourselves to about 10 minutes, one question each. So ask a question that you'd like to ask to one of the other panelists, and then we'll turn to you all. Is that okay? Okay. So we'll start with you.
I was getting a chair, so I missed the brief.
Okay. I'm just suggesting that that's not fair. I'm sorry. I'm inviting the panelists to ask each other one question, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So I'll time that. We'll see if how that goes time-wise. We have about 10 minutes for this panel to discuss, and then the rest open it up. So if you have a burning question, please ask it.
I did have a specific question on Joanna's presentation and whether the online courses, is there a specific remit what the courses are on?
Speak up a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
That's
So the question for Joanna was whether the online courses had a specific remit of what they cover, like what topics and, inclusion criteria, I guess, for potential applicants.
Great question. So for the first year we were running the programme, we had a completely open application because we wanted to see where the demand was, not just in terms of the level of study, so bachelor's, master's, PhD or certificates, but also in subject area. We've sort of evolved it over the last 2 years to focus in on these sort of service delivery type subjects. So we have a lot of people studying education, but sort of specific delivery aspects of that, and also healthcare as well. So we work with a couple of universities that specialise in health training. We have a number of students on certificate courses, so it's all fully accredited, and demand for that has been really high. And we've seen that in practice after the earthquake, of course, but obviously more generally in people's roles in the community. Okay. Shall I stop there? Okay, sorry, I'm enthusiastic. I can't.
just because our time.
Yeah.
Saleyha, do you have a question?
Sure, yeah, I was really keen with what you said, Luma, about ensuring that research is not extractive. And it's something I'm really sort of sensitive about. And trying to really,
Sorry.
yeah, so it's about ensuring, you know, methods to ensure that your research is not extractive, but more collaborative. And you spoke about it a little bit briefly, but I had it on my list of things to come up to you and say, you tell me exactly how. So could you, so I'll do that now.
Yeah.
Could you, I'm very keen to make sure that that's across my work. And I would be really grateful if you could dig into that method a bit more.
Of course, thank you for asking that. It was quite a challenge to figure out how to involve the communities, especially as you're putting your researcher hat on and you're trying to use evidence-based literature. You're trained as someone always has to refer to the literature when you develop methodologies. But there was a very well-known model called the participatory action-based approach, which encourages you to always listen to the community first. And while we kept seeing it in the literature in the past in terms of mental health interventions, so you'd see them do focus groups with the refugees and with the host community members and asking them, what do you need? They don't actually end up implementing their needs. They still go back to the original plan that they had that was funded by, let's say, an external actor. So it can be as simple as starting by developing a community advisory board of community leaders, religious leaders, members of schools, institutions that are part of daily life. Those are the people that communities look up to and deal with on a daily basis. They have trust in. We see they exist in refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon, all around the world. And involving them takes a lot of time. So building the trust, building the rapport can be very challenging for example, an international NGO member to do. So what you want to do is actually first develop the relationships with local actors who already have that influence, but become your sort of cultural broker. So those cultural brokers already have relationships, they have a trust, they're probably from the community, but they become the face for you to communicate and to build the trust. So this is one way to recruit members for the board and help devise a plan or strategy by assessing their community needs and then asking them, what do you think would work for you? What do you want to see? So literally asking those questions from their perspective and trying to implement them. And at the same time, exchange the knowledge there. So this is a very brief version. I hope I answered that.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. And I'll please forgive me. Luma, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
I actually had one for Dr. Fu as well. Yeah, I know. I think we have a lot of synergy, that's why, but I loved how you set the groundwork through your presentation about why you delved into what you did, but you didn't really get a chance to talk about your doctoral research. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing, your aims and methods?
Yeah, so it's the title loosely, and I know it will change before I finish.
That can't hear. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I normally have quite a loud mouth. It's the heat. Yeah, so my PhD's title at the moment is examining the impact of attacks against healthcare in an armed conflict using a systems approach. I'm within the International Health Systems Group within systems engineering. I began in sociology and did work there, developed an understanding of migration theory, and I am now using that knowledge within my systems approach to understand more specifically the role that attacks against healthcare play in decision-making to migrate. So the concept of therapeutic geographies, because I just reflected it back on myself, because I thought, if something happened to healthcare and you internalize it, you think, what would you do if it was you and your family? And if I have people in my family who need good access to healthcare, I have a chronic condition, I have lupus. If something happened, and more so for my family, you think about your family, you think if something happened to healthcare here, if something happened to Addenbrooke's, if I had the means, would I stay or would I leave? I would probably try to leave for the sake of my family and their needs. So why wouldn't that happen elsewhere? So I wanted to understand further about that, you know, who, of course, healthcare, attacks against healthcare, who that's, you know, is obscene. I'm not going to spend 4 years stating the obvious, but I wanted to sort of add to the narrative. If people don't care, and when I say people, I mean policy making, decision makers, the lawmakers, whoever they are, the ones that are the people in power. If we can't motivate them to move because of a point of, you know, just human nature, do not bomb hospitals, provide the mechanisms to bomb hospitals and kill healthcare workers and patients, maybe they will respond to other things. And migration is something they feel passionately about, money. So why not? So I'm trying to find out ways through evidence-based research that might motivate them in a different way. So yeah. It's mixed methods as well, sorry.
And these conversations can go on and continue. We're just starting them and then you can pick them up later on. Maha, what would you like to?
My question is for anyone actually here, because I'm interested in education for service delivery. That's something that all of us have talked about. You know, has anyone done, and actually for the, or everyone also, has anyone done education for mental health service delivery? My question actually is in the context of Myanmar, is that there are only 8 counselors in the entire country with a master's degree. And there is one half Irish, half Burmese clinical psychologist. And most of the services are provided by MHPSS workers of varying qualifications. You know, some might have attended a 3-day training on psychological first aid. And then they might be working with someone who has substance use and maybe bipolar, in the background that they don't know how to handle. So like, I wonder, how do you work through that?
Can I make a suggestion? Because we have just a little over a minute. So I think that's a fantastic question. We can open it up to the floor. So we'll hold that for a minute and ask Joanna, then we'll return. Is that okay? Because that gives people a chance to think about that for a minute. Thank you. Joanna.
I was actually going to ask Maha about this because it's something that we wanted to talk about. Exactly, yeah. So I think it's an area that we would really love to explore. We know the need. That was going to be. Oh, sorry, that was going to be my question. So yeah, we can open up. No, it's fine.
Okay. So we'll open this up because we've had duplicate questions here. Can anyone in the audience, would they like to respond to that question?
Want to repeat it as well?
Yes.
Just for the sake.
And anyone else on the panel of you three, because Joanna said that was her question too. Maha, can you repeat your question?
Yes, what have you done with education for service delivery in mental health care?
Okay.
Or either for a country or a specific group?
So educating the groups that will deliver the service?
Yeah, educating learners, students, so that they deliver.
Okay, and they don't have to have the qualifications or.
They need the qualification.
Okay.
Like, how do you develop that?
Okay. Great question.
Okay, Annalan.
So one thing we talked about in Cambridge Global Health Partnerships is about using the resources available in the UK, because actually a lot of healthcare training is sometimes, particularly postgraduate level, is delivered online and through webinars or through online kind of virtual teaching, and actually trying to figure out how we connect them to organisations like Cambridge, like Addenbrooke's Hospital, that they can be plugged into, so they get, because a lot of the, like on mental health, for example, like you're saying about bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder. These are things that obviously happen in the UK as well, and people have different approaches. So that's one approach we were thinking and seeing how we can map that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, well, yeah, Luma?
I'd like to add as well, I completely agree with you about the online approach. And with Ila Beirut, what we did is we might have skipped the step of educating those who don't have the credentials, but we utilized the people who have the credentials to basically deliver their services to larger groups. So we did peer support group therapy sessions. We had ones that organically were developed by starting ours with one therapist who was affiliated with us, and then frontline workers would join. So let's say they were frontline workers for a hospital or a non-medical service, and they would join together, and that becomes therapy on its own. So rather than thinking about increasing the qualifications, think about how do you provide access to a larger group that almost develops itself further. And psychological first aid training can be a good start.
But that is actually a problem. That is actually that I am actually, or we in Myanmar and many other low resource countries are experiencing. So NGOs usually come in with this approach. And just for example, so they go and see this psychological first aid provider or mental health psychosocial support provider. And this is actually a quote from one of the clients. She said that they asked me to talk about all the bad things that happened to me. And I did. And I felt like being stirred in like a soup, and then like left in a whirlpool. So the qualification is actually the training, the qualification, the education is very important. It's not that like we don't have to have MHPS as workers, we do, but it has to be, multiple. And another aspect there that I would like to add there is actually, there's an assumption seems like, when foreign NGOs come in to low resource countries, there is an assumption that, as if the people in these countries can learn only HPSs. They can learn more. They can get master's degree in counseling. There's no actually help there. If you have access to chevening data, look at it like over the decades, how many chevening scholarships have they given to mental health, counseling, direct services? It's actually, it sounds like it's not in their goal, yeah, so yeah.
So one thing that we do, my specialism is emergency medicine, and one of the routes that I work through is my Royal College of the specialism. So the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, I'm not sure if it would be the same for the relevant college within the UK, Royal College of Psychiatry. But what we've tried to do is build collaborations, academic and professional collaborations with and for example, in Syria, they made a relationship with parts of Syria that weren't associated with the regime, but elsewhere. And that was driven by the diaspora. So it's very diaspora-led. And it's brilliant, that happens. And we've got similar projects now in other countries. So I'm sorry. So in Pakistan and other areas where and I think they're developing one in Palestine. But I think it's about drawing on the diaspora who are within that. So I just wonder whether there is a similar model or that kind of international collaboration with an institution that's here, that has the teaching, that has the mechanisms, and that has the manpower and the reputation maybe. I don't know, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah. So just the Royal College, other Royal Colleges doing the same thing. So Royal College GPs, for example, do a train the trainer workshops.
Just really briefly say that, so as a scholarship provider, we would absolutely love to support people who want to study and gain this sort of degree in qualifications. But we very rarely have people who come and ask to study that subject. So I think it goes back further that there needs to be awareness of what that means as a career path before we see people coming forward to want to study. So I think that's where we sit.
There would be the Royal College of Psychiatry, also the British Psychological Association, BPS Society, as well as the British Counseling and Psychoanalysis actually work together. They collaborate. And there's a master's program beginning here, Foundations of Clinical Psychology, which is integrating all of these. And then people move on in the direction they want. So I'm just thinking how this fits together. Okay, you've been very patient. Would any of you like to ask any questions? Please.
Thank you for all. My question for Luma, when you are asking in focus groups for the people about their experience, especially about the sensitive issue, many times this people will not express their, in-depth feelings or perceptions or problems. So how do you deal with this? Like, if you could guide what the people want to say in front of others, and also it's easy to address the challenges and the problems, but sometimes the local discussion cannot find the solution, cannot find the options, or can find a solution which is not solving the problem. So how also you deal with lack of solutions or biased solutions of the local?
Fantastic question. It was one of the hardest things to do is running these focus groups, because in a way you're opening up the wounds and you're not giving a final solution when you're done with the sessions. You're not telling them, here's an intervention that's going to tick all the boxes and solve your problems. It never was that. But what we started to do is create a safe space for participants, and we only allowed 6 to 8 participants maximum. And obviously splitting with gender, because we thought that there would be a difference in how people would express themselves and how comfortable and how trusting. We made sure the refugees and the host community were separate. So creating that safe space meant, setting boundaries, privacy, confidentiality, creating that awareness that I'm part of mental health. I listen to this all the time. We want you to feel comfortable. We want you to tell us and teach us about how you experience distress. And it depends on the interviewer as well, right? So how you ask the questions, how do you navigate? And you'd be surprised, many people open up. And as soon as one person opens up, the rest do. Now, okay.
I'm
Stop there.
super sorry. So this is not me, but we've been asked to wrap it up. So we started late, we got less time, and we need to stop. But please continue to talk among yourselves. Please continue to discuss your details. And thank you so much for being such a great audience on a very hot day at the end of a very hot day. Thank you very much.